The amber warning lights pulsed through the ship's cabin as Thera pressed her four-fingered hand against the viewport, watching Earth grow larger in her view. The blue-green planet looked nothing like the sophisticated crystal cities of her homeworld, Nylaria Prime. At 13 cycles old, she'd visited dozens of worlds with her parents on their diplomatic missions, but she'd never imagined her first encounter with Earth would be like this. Navigation systems critical, the ship's AI announced in their native tongue. Atmospheric entry in 40 seconds. Thera's mother, First Ambassador Naira, worked frantically at the controls, her silvery skin reflecting the emergency lights. Thera, secure yourself in the preservation pod. Now. But mother. That wasn't a request. Her father's deep voice cut through the chaos as he rushed from the engine room, his normally pristine diplomatic robes stained with coolant fluid. The containment field is failing. We can't stabilize the descent. Thera had never heard fear in her father's voice before. As Second Ambassador Kelvin's daughter, she'd been trained since birth to maintain composure in any situation. But as the ship shuddered violently around them, her carefully cultivated diplomatic poise crumbled. She ran to the preservation pod, her heart's pounding in her chest. The transparent cylinder hissed open, and she climbed inside, fighting back tears as she watched her parents work desperately to save their ship. They were supposed to be making history, the first official diplomatic contact between Nylaria and Earth. Instead, they were plummeting from the sky like a burning meteor. Impact in 20 seconds, the AI warned. Structural integrity at 18%. Kelvin, the secondary thrusters. Naira shouted over the groaning of stressed metal. They're not responding. Her father's fingers flew across the control panel. The sabotage was too thorough. We have to. A deafening explosion cut off his words as the port engine detonated. The ship spun wildly, and Thera's preservation pod automatically sealed and filled with protective gel. The last thing she saw through the transparent cover was her parents reaching for each other as the cabin filled with blinding light. The impact felt like being caught in a gravity storm. Even through the pod's protective field, Thera's body screamed in protest as forces pulled her in every direction. Then everything went black. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. The smell of pine needles and burnt metal. The soft patter of rain against her pod's exterior. The distant cry of an earth bird she'd only heard in research recordings. Thera forced her eyes open, fighting against the lingering effects of the preservation gel. Through the pod's transparent shell, she could see trees, massive ones, nothing like the cultivated gardens of home. The pod had landed in a small clearing, surrounded by ancient conifers that reached toward a gray sky. Pieces of her family's ship were scattered through the forest, still smoking from re-entry. Mother? Father? Her voice was hoarse as she activated the pod's release mechanism. The seal broke with a hiss, and Thera stumbled out onto Earth's soil for the first time. The gravity was stronger than she was used to, making her movements clumsy as she searched the crash site. Please respond, she called out in both Nylarian and the Earth language called English that she'd been studying. Only the wind and rain answered. Hours passed as Thera methodically worked her way through the debris field. Her ceremonial tunic, designed for a diplomatic reception rather than wilderness survival, offered little protection against the cold rain. But she couldn't stop searching. She found the ship's primary data core, crushed beyond repair. The emergency beacon, shattered. The diplomatic credentials and first contact protocols, scattered and burning. But she couldn't find her parents. As Earth's sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, Thera was forced to accept a horrifying truth: she was alone on an alien world. A world that wasn't supposed to know about her people yet. A world where she would be seen as a threat if discovered. Shivering, she made her way back to the preservation pod. It was the only intact piece of her civilization left, and its emergency supplies would help her survive until what? Until she could somehow contact home? Until Earth authorities found her? Until whoever had sabotaged their ship came to finish the job? Thera pulled up her diplomatic training protocols, trying to focus on practical matters rather than her growing fear. The pod's emergency kit contained a universal translator, water purifier, nutrient supplements, and basic medical supplies. The stealth field generator was still functional, which would help her avoid immediate detection. But none of that changed the fact that she was a 13-year-old girl stranded on a pre-contact world. As darkness fell, Thera used the pod systems to analyze her situation. She had landed in a region the locals called Oregon, in a relatively unpopulated area. The nearest human settlement was approximately 20 kilometers away. The pod's power cells would last for 30 days at most. After that, a wolf howled in the distance, and Thera jumped. She'd studied Earth's wildlife extensively during mission preparation, but reading about predators in scientific texts was very different from hearing them in the dark while alone. She curled up in the pod, wrapping herself in the emergency thermal blanket as she watched stars appear in gaps between the trees. Somewhere up there was home, her people, her world, everything she'd ever known. Tears finally came, silent and silver, sliding down her cheeks as she remembered her parents' last moments. "I will survive," she whispered to herself in Nilarian. "I will find a way to complete the mission. I will make you proud." But as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, Thera couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of her troubles. Someone had gone to great lengths to prevent official contact between their peoples. Whether they were human or Nilarian, they wouldn't be happy to learn that she had survived. In her dreams, she heard her mother's voice reciting the diplomatic corps' motto, "Understanding bridges all divides." Thera could only hope that somewhere on this strange world, there were humans who would understand her situation, and help her bridge the divide between their civilizations before it was too late. Dawn broke over the Oregon forest, painting the sky in colors Thera had only seen in mission briefings. She'd managed a few hours of restless sleep in her preservation pod, but the sound of something large moving through the underbrush had jolted her awake. Through the pod sensors, she detected a human heat signature approaching the crash site. She activated the stealth field just as a tall human teenager emerged from the trees. He carried what appeared to be a recording device, something called a camera, according to her cultural database. The boy had dark skin and curly black hair, and he moved with the careful precision of someone used to navigating wilderness. "Dad," he called out, his voice carrying through the morning air. "You need to see this." Thera held her breath as a second human appeared. The older man shared his son's features but had streaks of gray in his hair and wore what her database identified as weather monitoring equipment. "Remarkable," the man said, kneeling to examine a piece of the ship's hull. "The metal's like nothing I've ever seen. The meteorological station picked up the anomaly last night, but this is not a meteor," the boy finished, taking pictures. "Look at the burn pattern, Dad. And these markings, they're not random scoring from re-entry. They're writing." Thera was impressed. The boy had correctly identified Nilarian script, even though he'd never seen it before. She watched as he moved methodically through the crash site, documenting everything with his camera but being careful not to disturb the evidence. "Nathan," his father said sharply, "delete those photos." "But Dad." "Listen to me very carefully, son. What we're looking at, if this is what I think it is, we need to be extremely thoughtful about our next steps. The wrong people get hold of this, and..." "You mean like the guys who showed up when we reported that weird signal last year? The ones who confiscated all your equipment and made us sign those papers?" Thera's heart beat faster. These humans had previous experience with classified activities, and more importantly, they seemed reluctant to involve authorities. Perhaps. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp warning from her pod systems. The power cell sustaining her stealth field was failing much faster than expected, damaged in the crash. She had seconds at most before. The field collapsed with an audible pop. Both humans spun toward the sound, and Thera found herself staring directly into their shocked faces. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Nathan's camera slipped from his fingers, hitting the forest floor with a soft thud. "Holy! Don't be afraid," Thera said in careful English, raising her hands in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I mean you no harm." Dr. Harrison, she'd caught his full name from their earlier conversation, pushed his son behind him. But she noticed he didn't run or shout, and his expression held more concern than fear. "Are you injured?" The question surprised her. It was the first thing her own parents would have asked, but she hadn't expected such immediate compassion from humans. "No. The preservation pod protected me during the crash. But my parents..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Nathan stepped out from behind his father, his initial shock giving way to what appeared to be wonder. "You're just a kid. Like me. I am 13 cycles, years, in your measurement. My name is Thera. I..." Her voice broke as the events of the past day caught up with her. "I need help." Dr. Harrison's expression softened. He took off his jacket and approached slowly, holding it out to her. It was only then that Thera realized she was shivering in her torn diplomatic tunic. "First things first. Let's get you warm and somewhere safe. Then we can figure out next steps." "Dad," Nathan said urgently, "the clearing. From your research station?" His father nodded. "Good thinking. It's isolated, defendable, and I own the land. No unexpected visitors." He turned back to Thera. "We have a small facility about 2 miles from here. It's not much, but it's secure and private. Will you trust us?" Thera thought of all her diplomatic training, all the protocols for first contact situations. None of them covered what to do when you crashed ahead of schedule and had to rely on the kindness of strangers. But as she looked at Nathan's open, curious face and his father's concerned expression, she knew she had to take the risk. "Yes," she said. "But there are things I need to bring. And..." She glanced at the wreckage of her family's ship. "There are components here that cannot fall into the wrong hands." "We'll help you gather what's essential," Dr. Harrison assured her. "Nathan, get the packs from the truck. We'll make it look like we were just collecting mineral samples." He met Thera's gaze. "I've spent my career studying atmospheric anomalies. Sometimes, I've seen things that defy conventional explanation. I've learned when to keep quiet and when to help." As Nathan disappeared into the trees, Thera helped Dr. Harrison collect key pieces of technology from the crash site. Her translator was working perfectly now, allowing her to explain which components were crucial and which could be left to rust in the forest. "Why are you helping me?" she asked as they worked. "Your world isn't supposed to know about mine yet. We were coming to establish first contact through proper channels, but someone..." She trailed off, remembering the explosion. Dr. Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Because 20 years ago, I watched government agents take away a colleague who'd found evidence of non-Earth technology. He was trying to bridge gaps between worlds, to expand human understanding. He disappeared, and all his work was classified. I swore if I ever had the chance to do things differently." He smiled sadly. "Besides, you remind me of Nathan when he lost his mother. No child should face tragedy alone, no matter what planet they're from." Nathan returned with the packs, and they quickly loaded the most important salvage. Thera took one last look at the crash site, memorizing every detail. Somewhere in the wreckage were answers about who had sabotaged her family's mission and why. But those answers would have to wait. As they hiked through the forest, Nathan walked beside her, quietly pointing out local plants and animals. His presence was comforting, a reminder that even on this alien world, some things were universal. Curiosity. Compassion. The ability to look past differences and see the person underneath. The research station appeared through the trees, a small, sturdy building perched on the edge of a private clearing. It wasn't the diplomatic reception they'd planned for humanity's first official alien visitor. But as Thera followed her new allies toward shelter, she realized that maybe this was better. Real understanding didn't come from formal ceremonies and prepared speeches. It came from moments like this, three people from different worlds, choosing trust over fear, walking together through the morning mist of an Oregon forest. The research station's main room hummed with activity as Thera worked on the salvaged communications array. After 3 days of hiding here, she'd transformed a corner into a makeshift workshop, surrounding herself with twisted pieces of Nilarian technology. Dr. Harrison had provided Earth tools and materials, while Nathan helped by sketching her designs and running calculations. The quantum resonance is still off, Thera muttered, adjusting what looked like a crystal growth inside the device. Without the primary matrix. Could we substitute something? Nathan asked, looking up from his notebook. He'd been documenting everything about Nilarian technology, his natural curiosity matched only by his ability to grasp complex concepts. Dad's weather station has some pretty sophisticated equipment. Before Thera could respond, Dr. Harrison burst through the door, his face tight with concern. We have company. Multiple vehicles on the access road. Thera's hearts clenched. She'd known this moment might come, but hoping to avoid it entirely. Government agents? Worse. He pulled up footage from the station's security cameras on his tablet. Private military contractors. Meridian Securities. They're the ones who handle all the classified retrievals in this region. Someone must have detected the crash energy signature. Nathan was already moving, helping Thera gather the most sensitive pieces of technology. They'd prepared for this, running drills at Dr. Harrison's insistence. The basement lab, he asked. His father nodded. Everything in the containment room. Quick and quiet. Thera followed Nathan down the narrow stairs to the station's subterranean level. The basement lab was Dr. Harrison's real workspace, where he conducted his more controversial atmospheric research. A hidden room behind a false wall would conceal her and the Nilarian technology. As they secured the last pieces, heavy footsteps sounded on the floor above. Thera caught fragments of conversation through the ceiling. Energy readings consistent with the orbital anomaly. Full sweep of the property. Harrison's history of unusual findings. You have to go back up, Thera whispered to Nathan. If they find us both down here. I'm not leaving you alone. Nathan. She gripped his hand, her silver skin contrasting with his brown. Your father needs backup for his story. Remember the plan. He squeezed her hand once, then slipped out of the hidden room. Thera sealed herself inside just as boots clattered on the basement stairs. Through a tiny observation slot, she watched 4 armed men in tactical gear sweep the basement. Dr. Harrison and Nathan followed, maintaining remarkably calm expressions as they answered questions about their research. Just standard atmospheric monitoring, Dr. Harrison explained, gesturing to his equipment. Though we did record some unusual electromagnetic activity 3 nights ago. I included it in my weekly report to the university. The lead agent, a hard-faced man with close-cropped gray hair, studied a handheld scanner. Your credentials are impressive, Doctor. Which makes me wonder why someone with your expertise is running a backwoods monitoring station. Sometimes the most interesting phenomena occur far from civilization, Dr. Harrison replied evenly. Fewer variables to account for. Or fewer witnesses, another agent muttered. Nathan shifted slightly, and Thera held her breath. But the boy's face remained neutral as he organized papers on a desk, playing the role of dutiful research assistant perfectly. The scanner chirped as the lead agent passed near the hidden room. Thera's heart nearly stopped, but the device was only picking up trace readings from Dr. Harrison's own experiments. The careful shielding they'd installed was holding. "Mind if we take a look at your data logs?" the agent asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a question. "Of course." Dr. Harrison moved to his computer. "Nathan, why don't you head upstairs and make some coffee for our guests?" As Nathan climbed the stairs, Thera caught his subtle hand signal, 3 fingers pressed against his leg. Their private code. He was going to check if the agents had backup watching the property. Hours crept by as the agents combed through the station's records. Thera remained absolutely still in her hiding place, trying to slow her breathing as the cramped space grew warmer. Her military-grade translator picked up fragments of encrypted radio communications between the agents, but most was tactical jargon. Finally, as the sun began to set, the lead agent closed his tablet. "Everything seems in order, Doctor. But we'll be monitoring the area for the next few weeks. Any unusual readings or observations should be reported immediately." "Understood?" "Of course." Dr. Harrison's voice gave nothing away. "Would you like the coffee to go?" After the agents departed, Thera counted to 500 before emerging from the hidden room. She found Nathan and his father in the main lab, already pulling up security feeds on multiple screens. "They left 2 observers," Nathan reported. "Hidden in the trees about half a mile out. Night vision gear, satellite uplink." "But they didn't find anything conclusive," Dr. Harrison added. "The containment room's shielding worked perfectly." "Still." He ran a hand through his hair. "They'll be watching everything now. Every delivery, every visitor, every power spike." Thera sank into a chair, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. "I've put you both in terrible danger. If they discover you're helping me." "Hey." Nathan pulled up a chair next to her. "Remember what you told me about your parents? How they believed first contact should be built on trust and understanding, not fear." She nodded, her throat tight. "Well, that's what we're doing. Just ahead of schedule." He grinned. "Besides, do you know how many kids dream of helping a stranded alien? This is like peak teenage experience." Despite everything, Thera found herself laughing. The sound surprised her. She hadn't laughed since the crash. "On my world, teenagers dream of meeting humans too. Though in our stories, you all have green skin and 3 eyes." "Speaking of stories," Dr. Harrison said, "we need to figure out the next chapter of ours. Those agents will be back, with better equipment and more questions. And sooner or later, they'll pick up something we can't hide." Thera straightened in her chair. She was a diplomat's daughter, trained to find solutions in impossible situations. "Then we need to work faster. The communications array is almost ready. If I can boost the power enough to reach the Nilarian outpost in your solar system's Oort cloud." "You can do that?" Nathan leaned forward eagerly. "With help." She looked between father and son. "I need to show you more about how our technology works. The real principles behind it, not just the surface details. It's against about 15 different protocols, but protocol went out the window when someone tried to kill your family," Dr. Harrison finished. "What do you need?" As Thera began explaining the quantum principles behind Nilarian communications, she felt something shift inside her. The crushing weight of loss and fear was still there, but it was joined by something else, hope. Not just for survival, but for the kind of first contact her parents had dreamed of. One built on trust, curiosity, and the simple truth that friendship could bridge any distance, even the vast gulf between stars. 2 weeks after the agent's visit, the research station's basement hummed with an otherworldly energy. The communications array Thera had built resembled a blooming crystal flower, its petals made of salvaged Nilarian tech merged with Earth components. Dr. Harrison's weather monitoring equipment had been repurposed to amplify the quantum signal, while Nathan's detailed calculations helped tune it to the precise frequency needed to reach the outpost. Power levels holding at 87%, Nathan reported, eyes fixed on his modified tablet. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed the long nights they'd all spent working on this project. Quantum field is stable. Thera made a final adjustment to the crystal matrix. This is our best chance. The Earth's magnetosphere is at its weakest point in its daily cycle, and we've got cloud cover to help mask any visible energy signatures. Dr. Harrison monitored the security feeds showing the Meridian Securities observers. They're still at their usual posts, but something's got them agitated. We need to move fast. Thera took a deep breath, then activated the array. The crystal petals began to pulse with soft blue light as they generated the quantum tunnel needed for faster-than-light communication. If it worked, they would have approximately 3 minutes to transmit before the power cells burned out. At first, there was only static. Then, through the translator, a familiar series of tones, the Nilarian Diplomatic Corps authentication sequence. This is Junior Diplomatic Attaché Thera, daughter of First Ambassador Naira and Second Ambassador Kelvin, she transmitted in Nilarian. Emergency Protocol 793. Respond immediately. Seconds ticked by. Nathan reached over and squeezed her hand. Authentication confirmed, a voice finally replied. This is Outpost Commander Ven. Attaché Thera, your family's ship never arrived for the scheduled contact. What? Sabotage, Thera cut in, aware of their limited time. The ship was destroyed. My parents. She forced herself to focus. I survived in a preservation pod. I'm with human allies who. Your location is compromised, Commander Ven interrupted sharply. Our sensors detect multiple Earth vehicles converging on your position. But that's not the worst of it. We've identified the saboteur. It's. The transmission dissolved into static as red warning lights flashed across their monitors. Multiple vehicles approaching, Dr. Harrison reported tersely. Military grade. They must have detected the signal. No, Thera said, horror dawning as she decoded the last fragments of Ven's transmission. They were waiting for it. The saboteur, they wanted me to call home. Nathan was already moving, grabbing their emergency packs. Dad, the escape tunnel. Won't help, Thera interrupted. Look. She pointed to the security feeds showing black-clad figures emerging from the forest. They have the station surrounded. This wasn't Meridian Securities after all. This is someone else. Someone who knew exactly what to wait for. Dr. Harrison's face hardened as he reached into a locked cabinet and removed what looked like a small silver sphere. Then it's time to use your mother's gift. Thera stared at the device. The day after they'd taken her in, she'd given Dr. Harrison a sealed container from the crash site, her mother's final message, meant for the human diplomatic team. They'd agreed to open it only in an emergency. Are you sure? She asked. Once activated. They're here for you, he said firmly. And I'm not letting them take you like they took my colleague 20 years ago. Nathan, help me with the quantum field projector. As boots thundered on the stairs above, they worked frantically to connect the sphere to their array. Through the ceiling, they could hear voices speaking a language that made Thera's blood run cold, a dialect of Nilarian she'd only heard in restricted diplomatic briefings. The shadowed court, she whispered. The isolationist faction. They're the ones who. The basement door burst open. Black-clad figures poured in, wearing armor that was an evil hybrid of Earth and Nilarian technology. Their leader removed his helmet, revealing familiar silver skin and four-fingered hands. Well done, young one, he said in Nilarian. You've led us right to the humans who've been contaminating you with their primitive ideas about cooperation. Uncle Reth? Thera's voice shook. Her father's brother. The one who'd always argued against contact with Earth. You did this? You killed your own brother? I tried to save our people from a disastrous first contact. Reth's face showed no emotion. These humans aren't ready. Look how easily they helped you break our most sacred protocols. They're dangerous, undisciplined. He was cut off by a high-pitched whine as Dr. Harrison activated the sphere. Brilliant light filled the room as a quantum field expanded outward. Thera felt Nathan grab her hand as the world seemed to twist sideways. Her mother's final gift wasn't a message. It was a quantum teleporter, pre-programmed with emergency coordinates. The last thing Thera saw before the field engulfed them was her uncle's face transforming from smug superiority to shock as he realized what was happening. Then the basement, the soldiers, and the entire research station vanished in a flash of light. They rematerialized in what appeared to be an underground bunker. Banks of advanced computers lined the walls, a perfect fusion of Earth and Nilarian technology. A familiar figure stood waiting for them, Dr. Harrison's disappeared colleague, looking not a day older than in the photos Thera had seen. Right on time, the woman said, smiling. Welcome to Project Bridgemaker. Ambassador Naira said you'd figure it out eventually. As alarms blared in the distance and Nathan helped his shaking father to his feet, Thera realized this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of something much bigger than a simple crash landing. Her mother had known. She'd known there would be resistance to first contact, had prepared for the worst. And now, in this hidden facility where humans and Nilarians had already been working together in secret, Thera would find the answers she needed. But first, they had a coup to stop and 2 worlds to save. Project Bridgemaker's command center buzzed with activity as Dr. Emma Winters, the long-missing colleague, brought up a holographic display of Earth's solar system. Thera recognized the technology, a perfect blend of human intuition and Nilarian precision, just like the rest of the secret facility. Your mother was one of our first allies, Dr. Winters explained, her fingers dancing across the controls. She discovered our independent research 15 years ago, but instead of reporting us, she saw an opportunity. We became the prototype for what official contact could be. And my uncle wanted to stop it, Thera said, watching red dots appear across the display, shadowed court ships, emerging from quantum tunnels throughout the system. But why? What is he so afraid of? Change, Nathan's father answered, studying the tactical readouts. People like him don't fear humanity's weaknesses. They fear our strengths, our creativity, our adaptability, our ability to grow. And right now, Dr. Winters added grimly, he's about to use those strengths against us. The Shadowed Court has been collecting Earth weapons and technology, modifying them with Nilarian tech. They're planning to stage an attack on major cities, making it look like humans rejected peaceful contact. Nathan, who had been quietly working at a secondary console, looked up. They're going to trigger a war. One that would keep Earth and Nilaria apart forever. Thera felt sick. All those years of her parents' careful diplomacy, their dreams of peaceful cooperation, about to be destroyed by fear and prejudice. She looked around the command center, seeing humans and the handful of Nilarian scientists who'd been part of Project Bridgemaker working seamlessly together. This was what first contact should be. We have to stop them, she said. Not just the attacks, we need to show both worlds what's really possible when we work together. She turned to Dr. Winters. The quantum broadcast network you've built here, can it reach everyone? The scientist smiled. With enough power, we could broadcast to every screen on Earth and every quantum receiver on Nilaria simultaneously. But the energy requirements would be massive, Dr. Harrison finished. It would expose this facility, and, he stopped, eyes widening. The research station. The quantum array we built. Is still there, Nathan jumped in excitedly. And probably under guard by the people we most want to expose. Thara's diplomatic training kicked in as a plan formed. If we can retake the station and link it to Project Bridgemaker's network, we could show everyone the truth. Dr. Winters nodded. But we'll have to move fast. The Shadowed Court's attack begins in 2 hours. What followed was a blur of preparation. Project Bridgemaker had resources Thara had never imagined: stealth vehicles, quantum shields, and weapons that could incapacitate without killing. As they went over the assault plan, she noticed how naturally Nathan worked with the Nilarian scientists, his quick mind adapting to their technology as if he'd grown up with it. "Ready?" he asked as they boarded the stealth transport. He'd insisted on coming, pointing out that he knew the station's layout better than anyone. Thara checked her quantum disruptor. "Ready to end this. One way or another." The assault on the research station was both easier and harder than expected. Easier because Uncle Reth had concentrated his forces on preparing for the false flag attacks, leaving minimal security. Harder because those guards included both humans and Nilarians who'd betrayed their people's best interests for profit or ideology. But Project Bridgemaker's team was better prepared. Using quantum shields and precise timing, they infiltrated the station while Dr. Harrison and Dr. Winters coordinated from the bunker. Nathan's knowledge of the building's hidden passages proved invaluable as they worked their way to the basement lab. They found Uncle Reth there, making final preparations for the attack. The sight of Thara alive and armed seemed to genuinely shock him. "It's over," she said in Nilarian, her quantum disruptor aimed steadily. "We're broadcasting everything: your plot, your sabotage, the truth about who killed my parents." "You understand nothing," he snarled. "These humans, their chaos given form. Their technology, their culture, it spreads like a virus. They'll change us, destroy everything that makes us Nilarian." "You're right about one thing," Thara replied, thinking of Nathan's quick smile, of Dr. Harrison's compassion, of how much she'd changed in just a few weeks on Earth. "They will change us. And we'll change them. That's not a weakness, it's the whole point of contact between civilizations." She nodded to Nathan, who had quietly reprogrammed the quantum array while she kept her uncle distracted. The crystal flower bloomed with energy as it linked to Project Bridgemaker's network. Across Earth and throughout Nilarian space, screens and quantum receivers activated. Everyone would see the truth, the secret cooperation that had already begun, the plot to destroy it, and most importantly, the friendship between a human boy and an alien girl that proved both species' capacity to grow beyond their fears. The Shadowed Court's attack fleet, exposed and facing combined human and Nilarian defense forces, stood down. Reth and his conspirators were taken into custody by joint security teams. And in the aftermath, as official diplomatic relations were finally established, Thara found herself appointed as a special liaison, the living bridge between worlds she'd become. Months later, she stood with Nathan on the station's roof, watching Earth's sun set in brilliant colors no painting could capture. "Hard to believe it all started with a crash landing," he said, sketching new designs for hybrid technology in his ever-present notebook. "Actually," Thara smiled, "I think it started long before that. With people like your father and Dr. Winters, who looked up at the stars and chose hope over fear. We just helped finish what they began." "So what's next?" Nathan asked. "Now that the official first contact protocols are finally happening?" Thara thought about the Joint Science Academy being built, where humans and Nilarians would study together. About the cultural exchange programs already beginning. About all the other young people who would follow the path she and Nathan had helped create. "Next," she said, "we keep building bridges. Not just between our worlds, but to all the others waiting out there. Because that's what both our peoples do best: we explore, we learn, and we grow. Together." As the first stars appeared overhead, Thara knew her parents would have been proud. Not just of her survival, but of how she'd helped turn a tragedy into a triumph. In seeking to prevent contact between their peoples, the Shadowed Court had instead created exactly what her parents had dreamed of, genuine understanding between humans and Nilarians, built not on formal protocols but on friendship, trust, and shared courage in the face of adversity. It wasn't the first contact anyone had planned. It was better. It was real.